Welcome everybody to Austin Prep Presents. I'm Jennifer Hodgson. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations and Giving here at Austin Prep. Today we have Felicia Giuliano-Kennedy as well as her colleague Brian Mahoney. And they are going to be with us today to talk about today's market for first-time home buyers. So Felicia is an alum of Austin Prep, class of 2009, and she is a realtor with Classified Realty Group. And Brian is a colleague of Felicia, and he is the branch manager at Guaranteed Rate. So welcome both of you. And I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, if you could give a little bit of background about yourselves so that our audience knows who's going to be presenting today. So we'll start with ladies first, Felicia.
All right, sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name's Felicia Giuliano-Kennedy. I graduated Austin in 2009. I was big into athletics while I was there. I was a 3-sport athlete. When Jen had asked me to do this, we had a conversation just in general about career path and how I ended up where I did. And one of the things that I equate my career path to and why it's such a good match is actually a lot of what I learned while I was at Austin, a combination of being pretty social, having lots of friends, and also the athletics really played a big role in just developing, my competitive nature and what's a good match for me. So that's how I ended up where I am with my career. I actually work with my mother. There were 3 of us that went to Austin. I have an older sister and a younger brother, all of whom graduated from Austin. And while we were there, our mother was in real estate, and we're actually, we end up selling a little bit all over in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, mostly. But I myself live in Reading, about a block from Austin. Lucky me. I get a lot of jokes with my friends from Austin that I still keep in touch with, that I live at the stoplight that they used to run to when they played track. So that's nice.
You're out there today when your track is out.
Exactly. So I am local, but I end up spreading out just a bit. And that's just a little bit of general background on me and how Austin played a role in where I ended up.
Wonderful. Thank you. Brian, how about you?
So I'm also a fairly local guy. I live in Danvers. Went to Peabody High School and then UMass Lowell, and I've been working in. I finally can say I've been working in mortgage lending longer than I haven't. So this is now my 25th year lending, and I work for Guaranteed Rate, one of the largest. We're actually the largest lender in Commonwealth of Massachusetts for the last 8 years now. And one of the 2 or 3 largest in the country. You might start to see some of our commercials on television. We had a Super Bowl spot that people seem to really like, so it's kind of neat seeing that for your company. I got into the mortgage business just by chance. Just met somebody I kind of knew when I was out socializing, and she said, "Boy, you really be good in the mortgage business. You should talk to my boss." And 25 years later, here I am. I met Felicia. How long ago, Felicia? Maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I'd say.
About that, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And so we met. I've had a really strong alliance with Felicia's brokerage for probably about a dozen years now. And we just found that there was a lot of mutually shared morals and ethics and practices, and we've just developed that relationship over time, and hopefully continues because I really enjoy it. So.
Yeah, and I think just to quickly speak to our relationship, because it transitions nicely into how to get started. A lot of times where I find my conversations starting are having them talk to Brian first. So where I typically start with people is whether it's a personal connection, and I actually have sold a handful of properties to people that went to Austin, or whether it's someone that I just meet through another avenue, typically the best place to get started is to speak with Brian. And so our business relationship is really important because we keep kicking people back to each other. So we want them to stick with our team, basically. So between us and then also working with an attorney, there's a whole team of people that you want to work on your behalf, and you want them to know how to work together. So just last night, Brian and I worked on something together where I put in an offer and submitted it in a competitive situation, and Brian goes the extra mile. So we have a similar work ethic and we align in what we think is important. So Brian will call a listing agent for me. I have the buyer, and just give his quick stamp of approval. He can't say too much about their financial situation, but just that we align and we work similar hours and understand the importance of some of these small things that they really go a long way. So typically when I've met someone, a lot of us look online on websites like Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com. That's where we start usually, is just clicking around out of curiosity. And from there, you usually see a house that really piques your interest, and that's what gets you started. And you say, oh gosh, maybe this year we will buy a house. I didn't know that we could afford this, or I didn't know that this was going on. And at that time, Brian is so important because he gives you the information that you need to understand where you should end up price-wise. And I always say to people that first couple of months, unless you're a rare case, which you're lucky if you are, but those first couple of months are typically spent just looking and saying, okay, great, we can actually afford something that meets our needs. So it's just that beginning process of the exciting part of just understanding, we've spent a lot of time saving and preparing for this, and understanding where your money lands you, what towns, what size homes, what styles. And that is just such a great place to start. So I'll hand it off to Brian and let him give you an idea of what you should be doing to prepare for that moment. But he really is, or someone like Brian is really the best first step for you when you're thinking of purchasing a home.
Right. Thank you, Felicia. And really, nobody's looking for a mortgage, right? You're looking for a house. And then you think, that's right, I need a way to pay for this. So that's part of the process. So, and I always say, I'm kind of like a trip to the dentist. Hopefully it's not that bad, but it's not that fun, really. So, but I do everything I can to make it as comfortable as possible, so that by the time your next checkup comes around, you feel okay about coming back to me. So, but what we're really looking for when we're analyzing, right? So the idea is to give you tools around what we're looking at and help you figure out good practices to make sure that you're meeting and exceeding what we need from a lending standpoint to give you the very best terms on the type of home that you'd like to buy when you're starting your search. So we look at, I call them, well, I don't call them that. It's known as the 3 C's. We look at credit, we look at capacity, and then we look at collateral. So the credit piece is really important. Everybody always talks about your credit, how strong, what your credit needs to look like. Well, the credit can affect your ability, not only your ability to buy a home, right? So if you have a history that is not that's not up to par, you may not even be eligible based on, because the likelihood of somebody repaying, if they have had trouble in the past paying bills on time, is lesser, right? So that's the predictor of future behavior. So we look at credit. The things that show up on credit would include credit cards, of course, auto loans, student loans, personal loans, and the like. What people don't know, this is a little gotcha, by the way, is if let's say you have a cell phone and you don't pay that cell phone bill. Now, the cell phone payment doesn't show up on credit, but if you don't pay the bill, they'll put it on your credit report, and that's really bad. So little things like that, utility bills. If you're in a situation where you have roommates, I see this all the time. You have roommates, you're splitting the Comcast bill. The Comcast bill doesn't get paid the last month, or it's in your name. You're the 2 roommates, head for the hills, you can't find them, and you say, well, I'm not going to pay that bill. I didn't get, so-and-so and so-and-so never paid me. That will show up on your credit report. And that really hurts your score, to have that. So it's really important to stay on top of not just things that show up on credit, but any sort of debts into which you enter or bills that need to be paid, including medical bills as well. You really want to make sure that you don't have people looking for payment to ensure that your credit's strong. And then the other thing that's important to note is, let's say you do qualify. The higher the score, the better your terms. Your rate is lower. If you're putting less than 20% down, not only do you get a better rate, but there's what's called PMI. You're basically paying a little bit of an insurance against potentially defaulting on the loan. That's how we allow you to put a little bit less money down. The better the score, the lower the premium. So it really snowballs. Not only just am I qualified, can I qualify, but beyond that, what are the terms of the loan for which I qualify? How much more expensive would this be if my credit isn't, what we consider to be top shelf? The second C, capacity. So capacity is just how much can you afford? We look at income. So not just where you work. Let's say most of us, buying your first home, you have earned income, you're working. It's not just that, but how frequently are you paid? And the terminology is called stable and predictable, right? So if you just open up your business, you open up a sandwich shop, and you've had a good first month, that's great. But we actually would look for 2 years, and we do an average, because we know that there are ebbs and flows in terms of business. So that's what we consider after that you now have stable and predictable income, and we'll give you an average for the last 2 years. We look at your current debt load, and then also that current debt load along with the new proposed housing payment. That's the capacity piece. How much can you afford? And then the third piece that will come into that is your assets, money. How much money are you putting down, and how much money is left in reserve after you put that down? That all creates a mixture around the capacity evaluation. Obviously, the larger the down payment, the better your income, and the more tightly you manage your debt structure, the more that you can afford. And especially if you're really trying to find the perfect house for your first home, that can be really, really important. And then the collateral piece is pretty simple. Collateral is just the house you'd like to buy. So most of us don't, we call the loan the mortgage. And it's, in fact, the mortgage is actually the instrument that makes the house a piece of collateral for the note that you'll actually pay back. The note is the debt into which you've entered in your agreement to pay back. So if you were going to lend me $100,000, we'd sign a note and say, I've lent Brian $100,000. Now, if you knew me really well, you'd want collateral, right? So the collateral would make sure that something happens to me if I lose something if I don't pay. And that collateral is the mortgage itself. So that we look at that very closely just to make sure that the purchase price of the home that you like to buy is supported by the market values of similar homes around it. We look at the condition of the property. Does it conform to the minimum program standards, right? So in general, most mainstream programs require what are called average or better condition, right? So I consider average to be all systems work. There's no evidence of damage. Wear and tear is fine, right? Because especially in this area, most of the housing stock is used, right? So somebody's lived there before. It's average or better condition. No damage, and all the systems work, right? So if you flush the toilet flushes. If you turn on a faucet, the faucet runs. Turn on a light, the lights go on, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's really that collateral evaluation. It's condition and value to make sure that what we're lending on is something that meets both of those standards. And so it really gets back to the basics of save as much money as you can. The more money you have in the bank, the better. Pay your bills on time, right? And then it really is important as you're looking for that piece of property when it comes from a lending standpoint, really make sure you are partnering with a real estate agent who knows and understands the market, takes their job seriously, has your best interests in mind, because that collateral evaluation becomes so much easier when you have somebody whose eyes and ears on the ground who can help guide you through, guide you down that path. So.
Just to add to that, Brian, something that's interesting, especially if you're just getting your feet wet with learning more about real estate and what the general climate is and such, the rates are very low, historically low. And so it's interesting because I think out there's a lot of information and people are hearing that a lot. And it is really important for people, especially first-time buyers, to understand that you don't necessarily need the 20% down, but that comes at a cost to you. And that when you're speaking with your neighbor and your neighbor says, oh, well, my rate was X, Y, and Z, that's great, but you don't have all of the information. And so I think it's really important as you educate yourself and learn more about the mortgage process in general and what that looks like, that these low rates, that they're great, but they look different for all of us, depending on what we're buying, how much, what percentage of our income we're spending, all of these things, how our credit is, a lot of different pieces come into play there that I think a lot of people just generally don't understand. And so they try to compare, and you're not comparing apples to apples. I'm sure you see that a lot.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It really is not a one size fits all. And I think people think that. And I probably would as well if I didn't work in this business.
Right.
It is, it's very much like insurance, right? So depending on your age and your health, you get a different life insurance quote based on specific to your own individual profile. And it's very similar to that. It's a lot of it's just simply based on perception of risk.
Mm-hmm. And I think that just going off of the low rate piece, it kind of brings us to our next topic that we wanted to touch on, is what the general climate of the market is. And so obviously low rates and low inventory are leaving us with really a difficult environment for buyers right at the moment. So it certainly is a really strong seller's market. And with the pandemic and all kinds of other factors at the moment with the presidential election, there were a lot of things that affected the market in the last year. And so something that's really important to know, especially if you are just looking to buy. So this doesn't necessarily apply to those who are moving to their next home and moving up, so they have something to sell and buy. It's a little bit different. But if you are just looking to invest in your first property, it's easier and harder for you. So it's easier for you in that you don't have to sell something necessarily. So you're coming at it from a place, a simpler place usually. So more often than not, first-time buyers that I work with either are renting or living at home with parents or living with family members. And so that leaves it so that you don't have to try to juggle the buy sell at the same time. But it does leave you typically in a really competitive price point. So in this area, the entry level price points that we're usually looking at are really difficult to break into from town to town. So they obviously vary a bit. In Reading and the surrounding towns, we're hardly ever seeing property come on the market that's under that $500,000 marker. This is single families. Obviously, there are some condo options, but that's really difficult because I'm sure, as Brian knows, and we see all the time, you typically start to realize that it might make more sense to purchase something rather than keeping up with rent at that time. So once you're able to afford something that's around that $600,000 marker is usually when you say, you know what, we don't really want to pay rent anymore. It's time for us to buy something and stop paying our landlord's mortgage. So that price point really has so many people in it. And so without boring everyone to death, because I'm a little bit of a house nerd and I like what I do, it basically, you have to be really, really creative with how you're putting these offers together in order to get them. So I keep making this joke this week, but I was at an open house last weekend with a set of clients, and the cops came. So there were so many people waiting outside of a property that the cops came. That's not fun for anyone, not even the seller, right? So yes, the seller will get lots of money and great terms for their property, but it's not really serving anyone to do it that way. So what's really interesting is that you really just want to try to navigate the market in a way that works for you. So I always find myself saying to clients, even at our first meeting, the goal is to be comfortable the whole time with an uncomfortable experience and process. So it's not always easy. The process isn't, but you are in a market where you may be surrounded by others who are taking a lot of risks that you don't want to. And so for most of us, our home is our largest investment. And when it comes time to purchase it, you, of course, would like to be competitive so that you can land that home that you've fallen in love with when you see it, because that's what we do. We fall in love with the house, and then we have to figure out how we're going to get it. But the key is to be competitive with people that are losing their minds out in the marketplace, but without doing things that are uncomfortable. So just to name a few, to go over them quickly, and these are just things that people are doing. It doesn't mean that you should do it, but it's something to think about. A couple things that people play around with are various contingencies. So home inspections, I'm sure we've all heard it. We've heard, oh, I waived my home inspection and that's how I got my house. And that's all well and good. And yes, you have a better chance of getting a property if you waive your home inspection. And the reason why is because it's better for the seller. And you're not the seller, you're the buyer. So how do we make it that you can compete with someone that removes that, but without doing that? And don't get me wrong, my first property, I waived my home inspection. So I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here, but the goal is to not do that if you don't have to. And so one of the things that we see are pre-offer inspections. So with some of my clients, again, this goes to business relationships. We have a home inspector that we work closely with that I can send a quick text message to on a Sunday while we're putting together offers and say, what do you have this week? Could you do a pre-offer inspection at X, Y, and Z property? And what that looks like is your typical inspection. So it's a little bit shorter. They call them 5-point inspections usually. So it's abbreviated. They're not looking at every single outlet in a house to see if it works, but they are looking at the roof, the heating system, the hot water tank, making sure that the plumbing is updated. So they're looking, it's more of a general overview of the health of the home, keeping in mind that in this market, those are really the only things we're able to negotiate anyway. We're not in a position where, oh, that outlet over there, it isn't working. Could we have some money off the price of the house? It's not what we're seeing. And so in a way, it makes more sense to just get a general idea of what the health is of the home. How's it looking? What do we need to budget to replace? Have the current homeowners taking care of the property? Do they service their heating system? What does that look like? And at that time, what that does for people when they do it, if it goes well or not, maybe they found some things they didn't expect, you then are able to make your offer based upon more information. So you come at it from a place of much more information, education, and in turn, power, right? So as a buyer, it's just such a power struggle. The sellers really get to be in charge, and they're the powerhouses right at the moment. But the key as a buyer is to take some of that power back. So how do you make it so that you're empowered and you get information? And so that's just one of the many ways with home inspections. When other people are removing them, you have the option, as long as everyone agrees, including the seller and their agent, to get in there early and to take a look and see if it's what you think it is. Some of the other things we see are various different ways to write things about your home inspection. So home inspection is for informational purposes only, excluding mold, safety, and structural issues we see a lot. We also see people agreeing to handle up to a certain amount of money, so an aggregate amount. So buyers will say, buyer will handle up to $10,000 worth of issues in a home at the home inspection. So these are just some things that people are doing. But when someone's looking at 20 offers, if you just put your home inspection in there straightforward, unfortunately, you're unlikely to win out in that situation. But if you've had a pre-offer inspection or we put some sort of aggregate in there, you're much, much better off. And now you're staying competitive. So that's one thing that you'll hear people talk about a lot. Your mortgage or your financing is also really important, which is why Brian and I team up it and work so well together. You need to be working with someone that has a really great reputation in your area and that people trust that they'll get the job done. And so that's someone like Brian that will make sure that this gets to close. So that's a really important thing. And of course, I spend lots of time on Sundays and Mondays when we're putting our offers together, telling people at the end of the day, if someone else has cash, you're out of luck anyway. So much of it, you do have to learn to kind of put your blinders on and stay in your own lane. There is a lot of that too. So unfortunately, it's a real emotional thing for people sometimes. It's exciting. You've fallen in love with the property, but I try to caution people to just keep it business until we get the offer accepted. So try to just stay focused on what's in front of you and make good business decisions, because it is an awful lot of money to spend. And if you're getting a mortgage, someone else could pay cash and remove their inspection and you're out of luck anyway. So you just always have to remember that along the way. And some other things that people are doing, which again, not necessarily the best. And I'm sure Brian can agree to this. There's a reason they're in place, but people are putting various language into offers about appraisals. So in many cases, even though we don't have issues with appraisals around here very often because our market is really strong. A lot of times people are saying, hey, look, if I agree to buy the property for $500 and the bank says, or the mortgage lender says $450, I'll make up the difference. I don't care. That's it. I'll just buy the house. And Brian maybe can speak a bit to that, but that's another thing that we're seeing. And again, probably not smart. That's in place for a reason, right? There's a reason that's there. But I don't know, Brian, if you want to talk about that quickly.
Yeah, and I get asked that probably on Sundays and Mondays more often than any time about waiving the appraisal contingency. And it's a calculated risk depending on the size of your down payment. If you're buying that $500,000 house and you plan on financing $250,000 of it, right? So you have 50% to put down. It really doesn't change anything if it comes in a little shy, right? Because it's not going to come in a lot different. It's not going to be, you're not going to offer 500 and it comes in at 350. It might be 500 and the appraiser just can't quite figure out a way to get there. Best they could really see is 460 in the market. So it's really a calculated risk. Where you really run into trouble is, I find, obviously really low down payments, less than 10%, less than 15%. And then the other thing is where it can sting you a little bit is if you're putting 20% down and the property comes in just a little under appraised sales price, you'll be subject to PMI unless you put more money down. So that's just the thing to keep in mind. But it's calculated. If you have great credit and even if it comes in a little bit shy, your PMI monthly might be like $26 a month. So I wouldn't throw it out the window, but it's probably not life-changing. And if it is life-changing, don't buy the house. So,
well, that's the other thing that's interesting about when you're looking for a home right now. And I'm sure Brian sees this all the time, but I always have this conversation with people that there is a difference between what you want to afford and what someone will pre-approve you for. So oftentimes, and Brian can maybe speak to that a bit more, but you are able to almost come up with the numbers yourself. So you can say, look, I have $100,000 saved saved in a bank account that I've spent a lot of time saving. I currently pay $2,500 a month in rent. Here's some more information about what we have going on, but what do you think? We'd like to see a similar payment monthly. So people a lot of times back their way into what their affordability is. And I think that's better a lot of times. And keeping in mind that my side of it, when you end up getting out there and you're starting to look for property, there's really nothing worse than being able to afford 550 and looking at things that are 600. And that applies to all of us, whatever range we're in. You can be up over $1 million. And if you have $1 million and you look at $1,050,000, you'll like what you see more. It's just how it goes. And so that's also why starting with understanding your affordability is the best place to be, because you don't want to be looking at things that are above budget, because of course you like them more. Of course the house has a nicer kitchen or bathrooms if it's above your budget. So I don't know if you have anything about that, Brian, like backing into it, if you think that's better.
Yeah. I totally agree. If somebody, in most people, I'd say if I talk to 100 people, 99 have an idea, and it's usually I don't want to be above this, right? I don't want to go over 3,000. I want to go over 2,000. So I run those numbers a lot. The one challenge that I have, and I try to kind of narrow down where you're looking, right? Because one of the components of that monthly payment is taxes. So, most of us are escrowing our taxes, and most of us are escrowing our homeowners insurance premiums as well. Homeowners insurance, going from house to house, similar sized houses in similar areas, is always about the same amount. But, you can go from Tewksbury to Andover. You can be looking at a very similar house, similarly priced, but the tax situation will be very, very different for virtually the same house. And so it's really narrowing down where you're looking as well. So that's always a little bit of a challenge. I try to make sure that I do bring that up front. More expensive taxes, higher monthly payment. Just be aware of that. But yes, all the time, that's something. And I also want to note that the most important thing when you're buying that house, when you're buying your first home, or when you buy anything, is making sure, more important than what I can get you pre-approved for, is what allows you to sleep at night. So make sure when you look at your monthly payment, that you don't get, heart palpitations. You absolutely positively not just believe or think, but I can handle this. There is nothing worse than financial trouble. If anybody's ever experienced it, they know it. So you really want to make sure that you feel really great about the payment that you're entering into. Don't worry about the maximum that you can get. Make sure you have your own maximum in your head.
Exactly. Do we have any questions before we go on? I was going to just touch on the process unless we have any questions.
Yeah, no, there was one that came up about, let's see, you talked about the pre-offer 5-point inspection.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know, when does that take place in the process, and how would you get that to happen? Because I think usually it's after you've put your offer.
Yeah. So sorry if I was not clear on that. So typically what would happen, and again, this is kind of why, and this is not a plug to work with me, but this is why you should really have a realtor that's working on your behalf and that you're in really good communication with through the whole process, because the key is timing on a lot of these things. Even an opportunity to buy something that's been on through its second week, for example, which crazy when things stay on through the second week, but usually you can get them closer to asking without competition. The people that will know about that are people that are actively working in your market. And so I send text messages, every Wednesday and Thursday to clients. Hey, this house didn't sell. I know you didn't like the kitchen, but would you reconsider? So the key is your communication with your agent. And so typically that's one of the things that's really, really important if you're planning to do a pre-offer inspection, is the timing. So usually we see houses come on Wednesday, Thursday, sometimes Friday, and then showing showings happen over the weekend. So a lot of times they hold showings in this area until the open houses, which are Saturday and Sunday typically. And then offers are usually due Monday or Tuesday is just typical around here. So the key in that situation, what I would try to do is get into the property on Saturday, one of the first people at the open house, if they're not allowing private showings beforehand. And then once you've decided, oh my gosh, we need to have this house, but we can tell this is going to be competitive, what do we do? That's when we would contact the listing agent as well as the home inspector and see if we can get something for over the weekend. So, and it doesn't always pan out that way. So sometimes they'll say you can come Monday morning at 7:30. So you sometimes don't get the ideal time, but it does typically only take about an hour. So where a normal inspection, depending on the size of the property, but say we're talking about something that's around 2,500 square feet, that typically takes about 2.5 hours. It would be a bit shorter at 1 hour. So if the listing agent agrees that you can have this inspection, typically they want at off times when other people are not trying to show the property, because you don't want to intimidate other buyers while they're there by having the home inspector, yeah, right, exactly. So usually that would happen before the offer is due. So that's what allows you to free yourself up from that home inspection contingency is having it before the offer is due. So that's important.
We've got another question here. Do you think that the market will shift anytime soon from a seller's market to a buyer's market?
So I think we should both answer that because we might have different answers. I think that we will see a little bit of evening out in the next year or so. I do think that what we're doing right now is a bit crazy. I also think that there are a fair amount of people that planned to put their home on the market, and then we had a pandemic and they didn't want people in their house. And I think then hopefully, fingers crossed for buyers, we'll see a little bit of a surge of homes coming on, surge comparatively, of course, but of homes coming on in the next couple of months as the weather gets nicer. And hopefully that stabilizes things a little bit. It's a bit difficult right now for buyers, but the rates are really low, so they can afford a fair amount more than maybe they could have a couple of years ago even. So I think that we will continue to be in a situation that favors sellers, but I do believe that we will even out just a smidge. Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I'll talk just from an interest rate standpoint. Our opinion as a company right now is we will be in a low interest rate environment for at least the next year, and probably beyond that. We're staffed toward it, and we are ready to handle the volume just that continues to come in for transactions. I agree wholeheartedly what you say about the delayed listings. I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of people who've spent a lot of time in their houses over the last year and said, this isn't working for me. And you'll see a lot of people saying, I need something a little bit different, especially those, I think, about probably 20 to 30% of us will permanently work from home going forward. And so there'll be more need for space to accommodate work from home situations, especially if you have a couple who are both working from home.
Mm-hmm.
My wife works, I work, and now I come to the office because we really can't. We're on top of each other, so I'm usually the only person here. So, yeah, so I agree that I think there will be an evening out, and I still think we'll see a low interest rate environment. And again, this is all the stuff that our analysts are telling us. Is we are going to see people who are just looking to move into something more appropriate for their new lifestyle as well.
We've seen a fair amount of moving to more obscure places too, I think is something to note. So we are seeing different markets boom than maybe we did a year or so ago. So what Brian's point about people not necessarily going back to the office, especially those who are commuting into the city, some of these towns that aren't as conducive to commuting into Boston are doing much better now, because a lot of people have either been notified that they won't be going back into an office in Boston full time, or they just don't feel the need to be as close. Maybe they're going in a couple days a week, or maybe not at all. And so, where people really wanted to stay super, super close to the city when they moved out of the city, now not so much. So we've even seen a lot of moves to the mountains, so to New Hampshire, to Vermont, or even people buying second homes, as well as just moving, out much more from the city, where we weren't seeing that so much. So it's affecting prices in towns that weren't seeing the surge as much as maybe those towns that were in the close radius to Boston initially. So that's interesting as well.
Not as important to be by public transportation for some people now.
Right,
Correct.
right. It's interesting.
We have another question here about, say 6 to 12 months prior to getting ready to buy and move into your first home. What are some of the things that you would suggest people do, for that? Is it, besides the down payment and looking at what you think you can afford, is it, watching Zillow and all of the listings and getting yourself psyched up for it? What would you suggest?
Yeah, so it's a funny question, because I actually had a phone call yesterday with new clients that said exactly that. They're living in Washington, D.C. They're planning, they both grew up around here. They're planning to make their move back to this area a full year from now. And they said, is this really premature? Are we wasting your time? What are we doing? And I really don't believe that it is, for a couple of reasons. I think at that time, even if you don't want to go through the process of getting fully pre-approved with someone like Brian, you might as well just have a conversation and say, I know that the rates are subject to change. I know that I don't have it completely hammered down where I'd like to live. But generally speaking, my income is X. I believe I'll have X saved. What are my goals? So I think it helps to have a conversation with both a real estate agent and a mortgage lender, even when you are a year out and you might feel a little crazy. And these people did yesterday. They said, we don't even know what town we want to be in. We don't know where we'll be working. But it doesn't matter, because at least you can start to educate yourself, understand the process, understand what things look like from Brian's perspective, probably more than mine. So having a conversation with me is helpful, but having a conversation with Brian is far more helpful, because you can plan so much more. So maybe to sneak to that next bracket, purchase price wise, where you've been seeing on Zillow, we really can get the 3 bedrooms and the 2 baths that we want at 700, but we're still around 625. How do we get there? So Brian can help a lot more with the planning of your finances, I think. Right, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really what I would suggest, is having a clear discussion around budget, and also what it would look like, how long you plan to be there relative to that budget, especially if you're a young couple and perhaps planning a family at some point. How does that all work financially as well? So like future proofing the plan. Spend that time you could talk to somebody like me. I would get anybody who can talk to you about finances and what things might look like in the future for you. I would include them, parents, people who've just lived through it, financial planners, all that. I would get as much advice as possible and have clear discussions if you're buying with somebody else around that budget. And again, what happens what happens if we're buying a 2-bedroom condo. What happens if we end up with 3 kids or 2 kids or whatever it may be. So
I think there's a lot of personal conversations, which is funny, because sometimes that takes a couple of months for people to iron out once they start looking. But if you know a year in advance that, especially like Brian is saying, if it's a couple that's looking, if you know a year in advance that you'll be looking, it can really help you if you just start looking around a bit, to have some of those difficult conversations rather than them arising when you start looking at places. So I always laugh that I spend so much time being a therapist and helping with relationships between couples at times, because we don't all always agree. So what's a priority to one person maybe isn't to another. And so if you're able to start even just passively looking, then you can start to understand, okay, we would have put an offer in on that one. We think if it was what it looked like online, or we wouldn't have, and just start having those conversations. Is the yard more important, or is an updated kitchen really what you're looking for? Because you can get a lot of that out of the way rather than having to spend a little bit of time doing that once you start looking.
Emotionally speaking, by the way, the same emotions that you that enter into the equation when you're getting married or planning to have a child are the same emotions that you experience when you're buying a home. I can't stress enough just how emotional that is. So to have all that planning that Felicia's talking about upfront in those conversations, it'll be done at a time when you're not really emotional, and it's really serious. Like it's very tense. It's a lot. There's a lot going on. So
it can be, especially it's a big financial choice, right? I mean, it's a lot of money. And so it definitely makes sense to just start looking around. And even so, a lot of times what I'll even do if I know someone's a year out is we'll still have the conversation, this house came on, it's on a little bit of a busier street than we talked about, but what do you think? And oftentimes, especially if it's in the market that your realtor sells in, we're in the houses too. So we can say, oh, that's interesting. I know that looks like that online. I'll let you know what that sells for, but actually that had a teeny backyard. So you can start to gauge more what's actually happening in the market so that you have a better understanding when something does come on. Obviously, we hope that you trust your real estate agent and that they can guide you, but sometimes it takes us seeing for ourselves, wow, that house really did sell for X, Y, and Z. And I saw that, and that had a small yard. I can't believe someone paid that. And so if you just start getting a better handle on what things are selling for, I just think it helps get some of that out of the way.
The educational piece, start getting yourself educated on
Right.
process. Yeah.
And that kind of, unless we have another question, that kind of brings me to the next thing we wanted to talk about. Do we have any questions?
I don't have any others in
No.
here.
Okay. So something that we think is important to go over is just understanding what the process looks like. And so I will give you a quick overview, but the bottom line is when you decide that it's time to purchase a property, you should have a conversation with a real estate agent, and you should sit down with them and educate yourself. So typically what I do with most of my clients is we have what's called a buyer consultation. Sometimes they're over a coffee, sometimes a drink. It depends on the situation. And basically, I think it's so important to see the documents that you'll be signing beforehand, what the process is like, where your money needs to be, what's going to happen, what's going to unfold. And you won't remember every single thing, but when you're going through it in real time, you'll say, oh, we talked about this. I remember the home inspection is not fun, or, you remember these things. So it's really important when you're first thinking about it and starting to look that you identify who you'd like to work with. An interesting thing about working with a real estate agent when you're a buyer is that it's actually a free service to you. So the buyer agent is paid by the seller. So no matter what, when you purchase a property, someone will get paid, right? So if you walk into an open house, speak with the real estate agent that's there and buy the property from them, a couple things happen there. One, that agent is getting paid both sides. And two, no one's representing your best interest. So a lot of times that's a very common misconception is people will say to me, well, I'm going to look independently. And when I find something, I'll just work with the agent that's there. And do people do it successfully? Of course, it's possible. But keep in mind that you don't have someone that's working for you if you do it that way. And so you're really shorting yourself, because what happens in that case is the real estate agent that's in the home has worked with the seller to come up with a price, and they've consulted the seller on what the market looks like and where they should list the property. So when you come in and you decide to make an offer, they can't give you any advice on the price and what your offer should be. And that's a huge part of our value. And so as a real estate agent and as someone that's, in the thick of it in all these houses, I'm certainly not going to sit here and tell you that when you're looking, I see things before you do every single time on Zillow, because I don't. Sometimes you find them first. But the key is to have someone that's working for you and someone that understands your best interest. So it really is important to have a conversation with a realtor early on and just get educated. So just get information and understand, because the key through the whole thing is to be empowered and educated. That's all you want, is to just know what's going on. And we do this every day and you don't. And so you're not expected to know all of the small details and intricacies of what we do. We are. So that's up to us to teach you. So that's the first thing as far as the real estate side goes. You'll spend a fair amount of your time searching, right? So there's a lot of back and forth and let's see this house. And that part can be tiring, but it can be fun. So you get to go look at all these different properties and check out what's going on in different neighborhoods and things like that. Go to open houses. And that part is exciting as long as it doesn't last too long, which it does last too long sometimes. But once that part is complete, so once you've identified and gotten an offer accepted, which again would probably involve some of the things we spoke about earlier, making sure your offer is competitive. And of course, I could get into more detail, but I'll keep it surface level on that. And once you identify the property and get your offer accepted, typically there's an exchange of $1,000 is usually what we see in our area at the time of offer. And that goes towards your down payment. So that $1,000 is what makes the offer a legal binding agreement. So that's your first step. So you give that money. And then after that happens, you typically schedule a home inspection, as long as it's not what we spoke about earlier. It's standard timeline. So you would have your home inspection about a week to 10 days. It would be completed from when your offer was made. And that's the time when you do your due diligence. So of course, when you make an offer and you give the $1,000, which is refundable, by the way, you are really hoping it works out. So you're putting your best foot forward. You've made an offer, you know it's a good fit, but you need to do a lot more research. So in that 10 days, though it doesn't sound like a very long time, you'll spend time having your home inspection, really getting more information, going to town hall, seeing if they pulled permits for the work they did on that bathroom that you love, really digging deep and trying to get more information on the property. So of course, if things get negotiated, turns out the roof is older than you thought, and you get some money back, that's when that happens during that time. After that is complete, that's when we sign what's called the purchase and sale. And that is basically a document that they take from the initial offer, and attorneys typically negotiate that in our area. So the seller will have an attorney and the buyer will have an attorney, and they'll, iron out all the details of this document that is extremely long, not always necessarily long. If you ask me, some of it's a little much. And so we'll come up with this longer document, and that gets signed by both the buyer and the seller. And that's when you're really locked in. So that first offer, like I said, is, we really think this is going to work, but we need more information. That purchase and sale, when that gets signed, you're in it, you're going for it. Unless something catastrophic happens, you're buying this property. And at that time, there's another exchange of money. And in our area, what we see mostly, and it's not always the same, but we see a lot of 5% of the purchase price. So typically at that time, you would give 5% of the purchase price less that initial $1,000. And again, going towards your down payment, but it's what makes that document a legal binding agreement. So at that time, you're really excited, you sign. It is important to know that money has to be accessible within 10 days from when you make your offer. So that's something that we see a lot, that people will say, oh my gosh, No one told me that. I didn't know I needed access to that. It's tied up somewhere and it takes a certain amount of time. So that's why that's just really, really good to know. And so you give that money and then you get to hang out with Brian for the next couple of weeks. So I always like to tell people that you'll spend so much time speaking with your real estate agent for the months that it takes to find a property. And even during that period where you're signing your purchase and sale, and then you really, really work closely with a lender to get your mortgage approved. So I don't know if you want to quickly, Brian, just talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, so it's taking it's a thorough analysis of the three C's, right? It's credit, capacity, and collateral. So I will have already vetted out as the loan officer your credit and your capacity. Compare it against the guidelines and find the most suitable product for you. Suitable happens to also generally mean best rate, so most affordable. But we find the most suitable product for you. Everybody agrees this is what I'd like to do. And then what we do is we will lock your rate. So lock is a reservation. And it just means your rate will not change so long as you close within that lock period. It will never change until you do something about that loan. You either pay it off or you pay it off, or you sell, you refinance, however you end up paying that off. Unless we're talking about adjustable rate mortgages, which I haven't seen one in years. So fixed rate mortgage, that'll be your rate, that'll be your payment. That's what you're going to expect for as long as you keep the mortgage. So that's what the rate lock does. And they're usually offered in 15-day increments. The longer term for which you need to lock, generally, the more expensive it becomes. Hence, the rate might be a little worse, right? So if you're locking for 15 days, maybe the rate's 2.75. If you have to lock for 60 days, maybe the rate's 2.875 or 2.99, depending on the day and the market. But we can have a discussion about that, and you're locked, and then our process starts. So you'll be requested to document everything we're talking about. And it has nothing to do with us not believing what you're telling us. Trust me.
Are you sure?
I'm positive. I'm positive. It's because I get paid a penny for every document I collect. No, we wear a belt and suspenders about everything, right? So it's not just, if we didn't trust you, we wouldn't even get this far. But it really is an ability for a third party, like an underwriter and somebody auditing the file, to make sure the quality of what we're doing is up to the standards of the program. It allows them to look at the file and say, everything that we expect to see here from a quality standpoint is in place. So that's why there are things that are requested, and they're a little eye rolling, unless you kind of understand the reasoning behind it. There's something like, are you serious, really? There's a reason, right? There's a reason. So what we ask is you just take it with a little bit of grain of salt. We'll walk you through it. We give you plenty of time up front. And in fact, sometimes I get accused of maybe being a little pushy, because I know that what we don't ask for and really say, I really need this up front, becomes something that gets chased around at the end because it's forgotten and it's already been packed away. So we really like to get as much done up front to document the situation. And it's not quite as bad as it sounds, but I think I make it sound worse than it is. But we do give you a nice kind of paint by numbers type of system where you're able to get us what you need. At that point, once we've collected the relevant documentation and you've had a chance to review your loan disclosures. So we have to give you a set of disclosures that says, this is what your loan looks like. And we can't change it unless you tell us to. Okay, so once we disclose that loan to you, you can't get to the closing and I can't say, oh, you know what, we figured that maybe the rate was a little low, so we changed that for you. Nothing can change without you telling me to change it, including loan amounts, down payment amounts, things like that. So those disclosures are really important to pay attention to and ask questions about. And we ask you to sign the disclosures just to indicate you received them. Okay, so that's actually not your contract. There's nothing committing you to anything there. It actually just shows that we've done what we're supposed to do. We've showed you the terms of your loan. You've had an opportunity to review it. Please sign. At that point, we order an appraisal. Most companies like ours, most companies or lenders, they ask you to pay for your appraisal because we have to pay the appraiser. So you pay for your appraisal. It's actually the only time we ever ask you for money. So You pay for your appraisal, that gets ordered. So the appraiser is our ears and eyes on the ground. They're a person who is trained to and licensed to enter a property and compare it against the program guidelines that are in place. So if it's a conventional loan, people have probably heard the term Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. That's probably not something that's all that important to talk about right now. But those are very common loan programs. They're trained to identify that the condition meets or exceeds the program guidelines, and they also again talk to us about the value of the property and opinion of value. So we get a report back that gets reviewed. That an underwriter who makes the decision on loan will review that appraisal and approve it. You then get a copy of it. It's yours, right? It's probably 40 pages, of which there are probably 5 that are really interesting to you, but you'll get all 40. And that's approved, as well as all of the documentation that you sent in. That gets approved by an underwriter who compared against the guidelines of the program, make sure that it conforms. You then have a commitment. Now, the commitment is really important. It's 99% as important as your closing date. A commitment from us allows you to get past your financing contingency date. Financing contingency is written into your contract in virtually every contract, and like 999 out of 1,000. And that's the date on which, once you pass it, you can't raise your hand and say, "I'm sorry, sellers, I can't get my mortgage." Too bad. So before that, if you can show that you have, even though through your diligent efforts, you've tried to obtain financing, but for some reason you cannot, you'll be issued a denial letter and you'll be able to recover your deposit money. Once you get past that date, you actually can be sued for that deposit money. This is like the tough part of the conversation, and they'll take it, and it's their money. So you basically just donated to the seller's, college funds. So that's a really important date. So again, really important to get things done up front so that we can vet out any problems up front and make sure that that commitment is in place on the financing contingency date. Or Felicia has to ask for a little more time, or say if you don't grant the time. So that gets looked at very close. If you can't grant the time, then we can't get our financing in place. We're out of the transaction. So that is why it's so important to have a good, high quality real estate agent on your side, have a lawyer on your side, and have a mortgage professional on your side, because we are looking at the same dates and understand the consequences of those dates, at making sure that we hit them. Once your commitment's in place, that means that there's nothing objective about about this loan that would make us feel as though there's anything that can get us off track. So that objectiveness is gone. It might just be we need a final insurance binder, or just proof that your second deposit cleared the bank. Nothing that it either did or it didn't, right? So it's nothing that to get us off the rails. So we can clear your loan to close. It goes to the attorney, and at that point, the attorney really takes over and conducts the closing. And it's always in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's always an attorney who closes a loan. That's considered an act of law. It's always an attorney who both closes the loan and conveys real estate. Even if you have a bag of cash to buy a house, it has to be. So the attorney then takes over and represents the interests of the bank, and in some cases will represent your interests as well, because we're all on the same team, and closes the transaction.
We have a couple of questions that came up. I'm not sure which part they're referring to, but the types of documents needed. I'll give you both questions now, and then you can see where they fit in. What type of documents are needed? And then the difference between being pre-approved and pre-qualified, and how does that process work? So I think
I'll start with the quick and easy one. Pre-qualified can be something as simple as, tell me how much you make, tell me what you want to do. I scratch it out on a pad, and if the numbers work, you're pre-qualified. Okay. Pre-approved means I've had an opportunity to review your credit. I've had an opportunity to review your income documentation and your asset documentation, your banking and any money under management information. I've run it through an automated underwrite, and I've gotten an approval. So if you're, in my opinion, there's not a lot, unless you just want to run preliminary numbers up front, a pre-qualification is not super useful if you want to go out and find a house and put it under agreement. You really need that pre-approval in place. And by the way, by regulation, what I've just described to you is what the difference is. That's actually regulated. So you have to meet that criteria to issue a pre-approval.
And we need quickly. We, as the realtor, when we put an offer together, we need a pre-approval to put together an offer. So in this area, no one is accepting your offer unless we have a pre-approval from someone like Brian.
And then the second question in terms of documentation, so some of it depends on the structure of your income, the structure of your job. So at a high level, it is either, let's say if you're self-employed, it would be 2 years of bank statement, 2 years of tax returns, 3 months of bank statements, and a year-to-date profit and loss statement going back to the last year that you have filed tax returns. Most of us will probably be on the what we call wage earning side. So it would be a recent W-2, maybe two, depending on the program, a pay stub that reflects at least a 30-day year, at least the last 30 days and year to date. So usually we collect 2 to 4 pay stubs for the 30-day, and it has to have a year-to-date summary on it. 60 days worth of bank statements, asset statements, and usually identifying something like a copy of a government-issued photo ID, such as a driver's license or a passport.
So we're getting close to time here, so I don't know if you have anything more you might like to share. I don't have any more questions right now in the Q&A.
I guess all I have to say is just that if you are wanting to just even have a preliminary conversation or you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm here to help. And it's really nice to get to reconnect with the Austin Prep community, and I'm here to be a resource. And so I know it can be an intimidating process, but it's something that I do every day, and I know I can help. So if you're someone who has questions or you are looking for some sort of guidance, I'm here for that. So please let me know, and I'd be more than happy to help in any way that I can.
And I would just like to add, I wish truly, I'm not joking, I wish somebody had done this for me when I was just starting out and buying, I really wish somebody had this sort of a discussion. So thank you so much for putting this together, because there's a ton of value in it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you both. I appreciate it. And, there may be some spin-offs from this. There's so many, there's so much to talk about when it comes to these kind of huge decisions, these huge life decisions, like you said, right up there with having children and, looking at the 5-year from now plan, 10-year from now, 40 years from now, it's a big decision. So it's important. So thank you for the good work that you're doing. So I'm hoping that our audience will join us again on another topic that along the lines of childcare. Our next Austin Prep Presents webinar is going to be on March 23rd, and we're going to go over childcare and elder care and balancing everybody's needs, because perhaps, you've gotten through that first time home buying scenario and you're in another stage of your life. And so we're going to have Sheetal Patel, who is from the class of 2005. She's the executive director at the Great Falls Assisted Living. And then we're going to have Dr. Hillary Bush, who is from the class of 2003. And she is a psychologist, and she specializes in children. And so we're going to talk about that sandwich generation and, balancing everybody's needs. And we're going to hopefully touch on topics such as child and elder medical services, maybe aiding in the financial and legal matters that come up, and then all of those emotional difficulties that we may be trying to balance, and then also taking care of ourselves. So that's our next webinar on March 23rd. But for now, thank you so much, Felicia and Brian. I really appreciate it. And for our audience, we'll make this recorded session available on our website in the coming week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to, you can email myself and I'll make sure that we get those out to Felicia and Brian. So thank you again, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good
Have a
night.
good evening.
Have a good night.
Bye.